Our biggest takeaways from NFL Week 9. That's what we're going to talk about today on Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find my Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his great work over at RotoViz. Week 9 in the NFL. We did not do the Sunday show. We've talked about it a few times. I'm still getting some questions about that, which is understandable. But we just didn't work out scheduling-wise. We are not going to be doing that going forward. So our Wednesday recording, which we're doing right now, you're listening to it, will be the first time we'll talk about Sunday. And so there's a lot for us to discuss. The highest scoring
You've written
player.
your Stealing Signals articles, which are absolutely fantastic, and people have a chance to interact with you on those. I write a weird, hopefully at least vaguely interesting piece on Mondays. Maybe my favorite thing about it is just finding some weird quote like this week, Mac not being convinced that's how things work, but not knowing enough about stars to disagree. Ben, we just had a big situation in the world in the last couple of days where I think maybe a lot of people's response just globally is, I don't think that's right, but I don't know enough about such and such to... Anyway, you were saying the highest scoring person. And so this episode will include debate, rumination, things that we ran across, and just also things that we saw.
Well, one of the things we can tell the listeners is generally we come on and we're like, yeah, we're talking for 2 hours before we started recording. We have not talked about football this morning. So everything they're going to hear will be our first thoughts about the NFL games. We've been talking a little bit more about the world. But I was going to say, and the player that you wrote about, the player that was the highest scoring non-quarterback was Jaxon Smith-Njigba. So that was a fun thing that happened this week. You mentioned in your headline, he scored 37 points with 2 huge plays called back. Obviously, wrote that up in Stealing Signals as well. He has I counted it up. It was essentially a 40-yarder. I think it was 39. And then later, something like a 35-yarder. I mean, we're talking like 75 yards in addition to the 180.
The box score has it as 40 and 38. So
okay, there you go. The second one I didn't count exactly. So the first one was I thought was either 39 or 40. The second one I thought I might have been underselling him a little bit on 35. So there you go. 40 and 38, 78 yards. I didn't count the second one. I was like, you know what? This is just a lot of yards at this point. I'm just going to write that there's a ton that he lost.
Separate from that, 225 air yards.
Yes. And which was the most on the week. 180 yards on 7 catches. A lot of people were like, "Oh, we finally got the high ADOT from him." I don't know the reason, the what or the why. A lot of people have been asking me, can he keep this up when DK Metcalf comes back? This is one of those performances where a wide receiver dominates a game. The way that I wrote it up is if it would have been very expected from Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase or whoever your favorite number one best wide receiver in the NFL is. And even then we would have said, what a dominant performance from Justin Jefferson. He absolutely took it to another level in this game. It can't be overstated how dominant this game was. It was in key spots repeatedly. Late in regulation, there was a 4th and 12 or 13 conversion followed by a touchdown on the next play. There was one, in addition to the long catches that were called back by a hold, there was a catch in the back of the end zone where he barely didn't get both feet down for a touchdown. Went incomplete. We haven't even mentioned that. Completely separate play. We haven't mentioned it because the next play he did score a touchdown. He gets open in the end zone again and scores a touchdown. And so you don't even bring that up because you're like, well, he got those yards and that TD anyway. So it's not like lost production. And yet it was very nearly another great play. He was absolutely dominating this football game.
And one of the reasons for the huge air yards is that he did get open for an 83-yard touchdown. And it was going to be a tough throw. And Geno did just miss him under some serious pressure. Right. So I don't put that on Geno at all. It's just one of those where it's going to be hard to make that play. But that play was also out there in addition to everything else that happened. Right. So it was an astonishing game. The kind of game, again, where you're like, okay, well, this, gives us a sense of how he had that 300 and some yard game in college. It
Right.
also, so one of the things that I think is kind of controversial just in general, it's also just very human. It's something that because of football, there's no way to get around, right? But with receivers, if they have certain strengths and then you don't see the things happening the way that you want, if you're for a player or if someone's doing well and you didn't really think they were going to do well, and that's frustrating because you told people to not draft that person, then so much of the explanation is, okay, well, this guy is getting to play with some superstar quarterback. This guy is not. And not only does he not have a good quarterback, but he also has Shane Waldron or Arthur Smith as the coordinator. It makes things really difficult to evaluate, and there are going to be lots of excuses in various directions, and then someone does play well, 7-8 years down the line for a couple of games, and people are like, oh, see, this is what I always told you was there. If it happens 7 or 8 years from now, that's too late, right? And you played with too many different guys. You yourself didn't get open enough. You can only make the excuse, oh, the NFL team used this guy incorrectly for so long before that player, well, it has to do what some of these guys do and just force their way somewhere else, or you've got to play within the scheme and you got to make plays. So I mean, I don't know what the answer is here with JSN. It's very difficult to square how bad he was as a rookie. And even this year, it's like, how do you get a player who has a 16 target game and a 225 air yard game with 37 fantasy points, and yet still very reasonably have the question when they come out of their bye, is he even startable?
Those are two different games you're referencing. The 16 target game was week 2. You reference his rookie season a lot there. One of the most interesting things that I saw on social, and I didn't spend a ton of time on social during Sunday because of the different ways that I've been watching the games, and we've been talking about that, and it's been great. Although there's a lot of times where I'm like, I kind of wish I could tweet about this in real time, but I don't get a chance to necessarily share some thoughts on social because I'm not going through the games. It's like hours after they happened, but it's new to me. And I'm like, oh, this is so exciting. The Drake May play at the end of regulation, I threw my hands up, as I'm watching the game by myself, like hours after the play happened. I'm like, what a ridiculous play. One of the things I did see at some point, maybe it was Monday or something, when I was writing my article and procrastinating and on social a little bit, was somebody bringing back up that interview from this offseason where I believe it was JSN with Chris Olave. I think it was at the Super Bowl, and Shane Waldron had gone to the Bears. And so they're asking, what would you say to the Bears, the players that are now going to have the opportunity to work with Shane Waldron? And JSN is basically like, good luck. He was very blunt and was like,
is this the same interview where he kind of like is looking around, biding his time, trying to think of an answer, and then goes, yes. Oh, is this live? And it's like, yes. Oh, he'll be fine.
Yeah.
But you're like, right. Anytime that you have to ask if something's going to be live before you answer a question, that's not a great sign, right?
Right. And so
one of the things that's great for him is that you kind of think that like he doesn't want to be a jerk, which I like that about him.
Yeah.
I mean, Michael Thomas is throwing his teammates under the bus in live action as much as he possibly can. But it's, again, not a great sign. Then I don't know that I've ever seen a quarterback play as poorly as Caleb Williams played this past Sunday. And we have watched a lot of Will Levis and Anthony Richardson over the last couple of years.
He had a really, really poor game. But where I was going to go with this, Sean, was that quote, as you think through what's actually happening in Chicago and what JSN is doing in conjunction, is very interesting right now. I saw some breakdowns of the actual play designs and those things. I didn't actually have a chance to watch them. Again, other things have been going on this week in the world. But I think Dan Orlovsky did one on ESPN. I was like kind of curious about jumping into it. But based on the tweet that I saw, which had a video, it was basically like, what are these route designs and concepts for the Bears? It's basically like Caleb's getting no help, which is what we've been talking about a little bit as a potential issue. I understand that Caleb is still playing very poorly, and there's a lot that we should discuss there. He's missed a lot of throws. Speaking of which, our guy CJ Stroud missed some key throws this week as well. There's a lot going on in the NFL world. But the Waldron stuff, I think, is interesting. The two best plays that Caleb did have early that I had in my notes, like, oh, these are exciting, were extended plays. There's one where he steps up to avoid a free rusher, and the guy goes right around him, and then he is able to break out to the pocket to the right side where the rusher had been coming from because he didn't have room to break out to the left side because that side of the line's collapsing as well. And he gets free, extends the play very well in the pocket is what I'm saying. I mean, that's a skill, and he did it very, very well. As he's rolling out to the right sideline, there's no one open. Roma Dunze very subtly moves away from the sideline a few yards and gives him a spot to throw to that's not back across his body, but is a little bit, but is separate from the defender. And he throws an absolute rifle on the run. I mean, just like a really good throw. And he did that again a little later. 2 on-the-run throws to a Dunze. Extended plays.
Saying that, my question for you is, when you're close to the sideline, are you supposed to give your quarterback a little bit of space? Are you supposed to be aware of where the sideline is? Or if you're wide open for like a 50-yard touchdown, are you supposed to like turn your back to the field, wander out of bounds, get 0 feet down?
The 0 feet
the sheepish like expression of like, oh, this is my first football game.
That's a Xavier Worthy reference for anyone who's not watching Monday Night Football or taking, following Sean's point there. Wide open. The way I wrote that one up, Sean, was that receivers are taught, even when there's a defender with them, that they have to be physical within the route to keep space between them and the sideline so the quarterback has room to throw it to and be very aware of their sideline. Worthy's wide open and is just not doing that. You're supposed to keep your vertical line. He's just drifting and drifting and drifting, and then the throw comes closer to the sideline than it needs to because that's where he's headed. He could have easily stayed in bounds and caught that football. But
is that a worse play, or is Malachi Corley's play a worse play? Because I'm tempted to say the one that you're worried is going to be repeated is the worst play.
Well, the Malachi Corley one isn't explainable. How is that explainable? You have one job: get into the end zone with the football. Like you're thinking, protect the football. You should be. The drop the ball before the 1 yard line thing is not defensible. They should just be cut immediately. Maybe not. Maybe that's a little extreme.
Malachi Corley this week, in part, I think, to give him some virtual good vibes across, I don't know, the ether, what have you. I felt bad for him on that because it's. I mean, you make a mental mistake like that in front of the entire world, and you're just like, there's nowhere I can ever go to hide because what I just did there is completely inexplicable.
And yet don't do it. It's done. It's happened so many times. It is inexplicable. And like,
well, you mentioned there have been 4 or 5 other plays this year where people have dropped the ball as they were going across, and you're like, what is happening here?
Kyle Pitts probably shouldn't have got the second TD a couple weeks ago. If they had an angle, the angle that they had on Corley's was really the reason they were able to overturn it. If they didn't have the shot that they had, if it was a game like Pitts's, then Corley's would have stood. I mean, there was no difference between them other than the camera angle they were able to get, is my take on that. Like Pitts,
I can't remember if there was a Jahmyr Gibbs one where like he was clearly in, but I'm also just like, why don't you run out the back of the end zone before you drop the ball?
That's what I
don't. Why don't you do a Barry Sanders and go like find the official and give him the ball and then go celebrate with your teammates? If you give the ball to the official in the end zone, you can be pretty confident that you're across the line.
These players understand when they're holding the ball they don't want to fumble. A lot of times they fumble as they're down and it's clear. Sometimes it's clear that their elbow hits and the ball comes out. And it's just like, okay, well, your elbows, that you were down, but they'll still dive on the fumble and be like, I gotta recover that. I gotta protect the football. They're very aware of that. An example I brought up as well.
Not Odell Beckham. He's like, that I was down.
Yeah, doesn't care about it. He's like, I'm fine. In my writing, an example I brought up, Sean, is in a UW football game. Obviously, I love to talk about my college team now and then. Against Rutgers this year, they had a blocked field goal, and a player ran on the field while the ball was still loose and not covered up yet. And you can understand how players on the sideline might get excited and make that mistake. And the reason I brought that up is if you really think about it, there's a lot of guys that get hyped on the sideline, but they know this is a boundary. I don't run on the field until I'm sure the play's over. What happened in that situation was he ran on the field before anyone dove on the ball. He got flagged. Instead of a blocked field goal and Huskies ball, they got a personal foul. First down, they went on to score a touchdown. It ended up being a 3-point game. It was one of the biggest plays of the game. Their drive, which was going to be a 3-point field goal and then was a blocked field goal for 0 points, became a 7-point drive. you can understand. I wrote that I can understand that mistake more. Husky fans were furious with this player. I can understand that mistake more, where you're just like kind of losing, and you're not even in the game. You're just letting your excitement get the better of yourself. When you're in the game and the play's called in the huddle and you're getting the ball, you're thinking, I can't fumble. I mean, among other things, I need to hold the ball, right? I need to control the football. Are you not thinking that? Is that not part of like being the ball carrier that you need to like cover up and stuff? And like when guys have fumble issues, usually it's just, okay, focus a little bit more on fumbles. And again, Shawn, another example, drop passes. Those happen, but that's a skill. Like, yeah, I can understand losing your concentration and dropping the ball. This is not a skill. Just don't let go of the football. You're already holding it. It doesn't require concentration. It's not a lack of concentration. It's an act. You're going out of your way to drop the ball before.
You're solidly on the side of this being a mental mistake.
It's the most insane mental mistake. If players can not get excited, my point about the block field goal example is, how does that not happen more? Because guys are able, even with their excitement, to not run across a boundary that they know is an issue. Why is it so hard for players carrying the football to understand they need to run over the boundary before getting excited? It's like, to me, it's the same thing. We do these things with artificial boundaries everywhere, and that happens all the time. And it's a way smaller sample of players that are running across a goal line than players that are getting excited on a sideline, but they know not to run on the field. And the guy's carrying the ball. How do you not know to get into the end zone before you drop the football? It's just, I'm sorry. It's insane. It
So
make any
the
sense.
question then is, are you going to try and trade for Xavier Worthy everywhere this week? Is it going to be something where he is the next JSN? Or does this mistake, which I guess I didn't see it, but evidently not remotely surprisingly, Andy Reid was furious about, in the fact that one of the other plays here that, again, it's just like, it's a hard throw. You're going to mostly miss it. But after Patrick Mahomes missed Worthy wide open a couple weeks ago, and then you don't have this play, and that's two huge plays you should have definitely had in Worthy's column. But you also had a play in this game where Justin Watson is wide open for a long touchdown, and Patrick Mahomes misses him. And as a result of that, you have 1 billion 2-yard targets to Travis Kelce and Hopkins. I mean, is that all we're going to see now when a team is like, we can't trust Worthy to do things correctly and Patrick Mahomes can't hit these vertical passes? It's just going to be, I mean, we're going to get like 25 targets a game to Hopkins and Kelce the rest of the way. Because the running back situation is also a travesty.
It is, but the success rate is there. I mean, like, I don't know if success rate is the right word. They when they came out of halftime down 7, they had 2 consecutive long drives. I think it was 13 plays and 17 plays or something. It was like 30 plays across those drives. They were like, we're just going to give the ball to Kareem Hunt every single time. And they were able to then stay ahead of the sticks and then convert the first downs, because you do have Patrick Mahomes and all this. It's not like Hunt gets 0 yards. He's at least getting the 3 to 4 to 5 sometimes. And they're able to convert first downs and move the ball. And then the short passing, right? Those 2 drives were just entirely Hunt, Kelce, and Hopkins. But they were 2 touchdown drives when they needed them. They went to that and it worked. I think Hopkins is the receiver that we've been talking about for like 3 or 4 years that Mahomes has never had, right? Like, Tyreek Hill's not even that player in terms of being able to, the slant for the second TD, to win on man coverage and have a big frame and just show, look, here's the throw. And Mahomes doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have to create. It doesn't have to be a trick play. I can just throw to this good receiver who creates separation at the goal line. And so easy. He's never had that player. That's not a Tyreek Hill skill necessarily, right? Like, that's,
well, and the thing that the Chiefs are unbeaten because even though he somehow can't make the throws that he used to make easily, he's far and away the best game manager in football. And right now, to me, it looks like you were right on DeAndre Hopkins. So I think that's a cool one for you. And also, I think if you're a Chiefs fan, you've got to be pretty excited, because having that player who can make those types of plays, it's really hard to understate just how terrible the Chiefs receiving core has been since they released Tyreek Hill. Traded him, obviously not released. It's going to make them tough. The flip side of that game is you just need more possessions. There's no excuse to be in a close game with Baker Mayfield and that version of the Bucs. The Chiefs have had some injuries in the secondary. It'll be interesting to see if there's anything to that if some of the reporting is correct, they try to go out and make a trade for some secondary help. Yeah, it was interesting there. I mean, I think the positive thing, if you are still hoping to at some point deploy Worthy this season, is that they did take him completely out of the game plan. They did still use him on routes. They still used him as a decoy. I mean, it'd be easy to get frustrated enough that,
yeah,
you take an even further step. I mean, they did take the step of like the manufacturer touches. They're like, we'll just go ahead and use McCole Hardman. Yeah. So that's also not good.
But he only had like a 12% route share or something. It was only the manufacturer touches for him. And look, I think that's going to be a short-lived thing. One of the things we talk about all the time with like anti-fragility and that stuff with first-round picks is you get opportunities to fail, and then they want Xavier Worthy to work, right? They've been playing him since week 1. They're going to give him another opportunity, probably next week, to make an impact. This week, he kind of got his benching by like having to run a bunch of routes and not get the ball. To me, the Xavier Worthy answer is extremely clear. You can't start him, but you probably shouldn't cut him. We were talking about maybe cutting him in like a guillotine league or something, or like I was going to. That's a different discussion where there's a lot of options available. I've had people ask me about cutting him. I'm not advocating cutting him right now when he has the worst game of his season. Guys can have lulls and then come back from them, and then sometimes really string things together, which a couple examples. Go back to Jonathan Taylor's rookie year is the one that I always love to go to. Marlon Mack gets hurt right away. Jonathan Taylor looks like he's going to be the guy the whole year. He should be the guy. And by like week 6 or 7, they're barely using him. They're using Jordan Wilkins and Naheem Hines over him because he's had some fumbles issues and he's having some trouble. He has a 3-game span where if you go look at his game log, I think it's less than 10 touches in every game, very few snaps. And then suddenly he has a big game. Then he misses a game due to
everybody's
COVID.
Like, this is why he fell in the draft behind Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah, everyone seems bad.
I don't know.
That's right. People were calling him a bust. I remember telling you that because even back then you weren't big on social, and I'm going, Sean, people are talking on Twitter about Jonathan Taylor being a bust. How hilarious. And you're like, that seems a little bit odd. And then sure enough, yeah, late in the season, he has a monster run. And so like those types of things can still happen. We know that some of these rookies have the late season eruptions, and sometimes those come after struggles. Not saying that's going to happen for Xavier Worthy, but everything I just described about DeAndre Hopkins, the one thing is they were moving him around and lining him up a lot of different places, which was awesome to see. He doesn't have the athleticism to win down the field and all those types of things anymore. They are putting him in situations where he can use the really strong intelligence, body control, and feel for the game to get open and win and do all these things that are going to provide value in a way that, again, I don't think Mahomes, even like prime Tyreek, necessarily had this type of player, but that can't be it. To your point, it's all short targets. That can't be it. You still have to have Worthy, is my point. Like you got to get that going.
Yeah, because you got to blow some of these teams out. You can't continue to, when you're eventually going to face juggernauts like the Ravens, teams with a huge upside like the Bills. Those teams are not as consistent. They're probably not as good, but you don't want to be this bland version of yourself when you go up against those teams, even if you've been successful getting through them in the playoffs in the past. There was a hilarious little stretch there, or a 2-play moment toward the end where they snap the ball. Mahomes immediately looks for Hopkins to just take like one step off the line and turn around, and he doesn't. And the play ends up not working because that's the throw he wanted to go to. And then like the very next play, they do the same thing. And that time Mahomes just throws it at the ground behind him. Almost like, my point here is that I wanted you to turn around. So they're still not even on the same page yet compared to where they will be as this continues to progress.
Yeah. They're going to get a lot better. That's going to be a good fit with Hopkins, clearly. And I think one of the things we talked about, like the MCL was a concern, and looked at some of the timeline stuff. It looked like he probably would look a little healthier. I do think he looks good enough that he's going to be good. He's going to be good for this offense. But your points about Worthy, we got to get, you got to be able to blow some teams out. You got to be able to hit those plays. They wouldn't have been in it if they catch that touchdown to Worthy early on. That's meaningful. That's the play that has to happen as well. And then it opens up the stuff underneath. Speaking of the deep throws, I did want to add, we talked about JSN at the very beginning, but I did want to add, like you said this, but I just wanted to emphasize it. We kind of switched we saw stuff that we like a couple weeks ago, we were talking about how he only put the one hand up. And I got some feedback about that. Maybe we're being a little too hard on him. His backhand got grabbed a little bit. We felt like, yeah, there was a little bit of a grab, but you still got to be physical to the ball, man. You're letting yourself be grabbed a little bit. That's the thing about this game, in addition to just all of the production and getting open downfield and all these things. He played through contact. The first play he made, 2nd and 31, they do a little wide receiver screen, and he's running through contact down the middle of the field. There's so many of these smaller receivers like him. Like we've talked about, he looks small on the field, but you got to be able to play a little bit bigger sometimes. There's so many of these smaller receivers that I feel like would have went down on that first contact. He turned that 2nd and 31 into a 3rd and 9. They get a big play there. It was a 2nd and 31 I have in my notes. Is that right? 22-yard reception, I think, that he kind of weaved through.
Catch and
Actually
run.
gave, yeah,
I mean, one
great
of the
catch
things
run.
here with JSN that it gets lost a little bit, I think, because he was so boring last year. People don't just think that he's awful because the stats were bad. They think that he's awful because his performance was so incredibly bland, right? And that's going to influence people as well. It's easy to forget that his yards after the catch numbers at Ohio State were fantastic. And then he went to the combine and turned in the same agility time as Christian McCaffrey, who, I mean, the time is insane. You should see that on the field. You're talking about him playing tougher and, making some of those changes. You don't exactly want to get penalties for this kind of stuff, but he's making plays in this game and looking for people to taunt. He's making plays in this game, and when they're called back, he's like, what are my teammates doing? He's like, cannot you not tell that they can't stop me? It's like, just let whatever happens. They can't stop me. We have not seen that version of JSN at all until this week. You haven't seen him out there running routes like you can't stop me.
That's exactly right. And you said the changes that he made there. And I think that's the point that, as people that have watched the game, that I think both of us are trying to emphasize here is sometimes it's like, did a switch flip on? Did this happen? What, can we trust JSN going forward? These types of questions. I'm like, I just saw what I needed to see. What we were saying we weren't seeing before. And I think you can definitively say there was an intent to improve in these areas, to play more physically. It's just clear if you're watching him play that in this game, he was essentially trying harder to do these things, right? On the deep throws, they're contested catches. The catch and run I was talking about, the frustrating thing, actually, the very next play, the 3rd and 9 that he set up, gets wide open, and he lets a ball bounce right off his arms for an INT, actually. This was one really bad play. That's early in the game. Right after that, or just a little while after that, he had the 2 back-to-back touchdowns where the one didn't get his feet down. He scores again. That's at the end of the half. And then the second half, he just completely takes over. And so all that happened after his drop that led to an INT. I just want to mention he did have a little bit of a mistake early in the game. But the second half, and then even in overtime, they get the ball first. He has a 31-yard catch in overtime, and they get all the way down to the 16. They run on 3rd and 1. They run on 4th and 1. They're not able to get it. He did enough to win this game, like on his own. Like he was dominant in this game. There was a lot of talk last week. Without DK Metcalf, this offense was not the same. They did not miss a beat in terms of not having the wide receiver in this game because they had a different wide receiver who played like a top, one wide receiver in the NFL in this particular game. This is one of the best games you will ever see. He did enough to win the game. If they convert down there in overtime, they go on to win it. Or if Geno, we've talked about his struggles after the first read. If Geno back in regulation in a tie game, they get down to like the 6-yard line, 1st and goal. He extends a play, and throws it right to a Ram in the end zone. Just a really bad decision. And they run it all the way back for a touchdown. Rams go up 7 there. That's prior to then Seattle going down and JSN catching the game tire to force OT. But if Seattle scores on that drive, potentially they go on to win if they can stop the Rams offense. The Rams end up essentially pushing Seattle to OT. Seattle had more total yards in this game and looked, I think, a little bit better than you would believe, although the Rams did some good things as well. But JSN deserved to win this game is what I'm saying from a wide receiver perspective. You don't see wide receivers take over games. And the point I'm trying to make is I think that the counter would be, why didn't they win then? Well, they should have won. Without that pick six, without the 4th down stop in overtime, JSN did everything he needed to do. In addition to making one fairly major mistake that was a drop for an INT, but like 7 or 8 massive plays. Again, a 4th down conversion at the end when they were trying to force OT. He made up for that and 10 times over. I mean, it was just a really, really good football game from a wide receiver.
The thing that I want to see as they go to their bye and then they come out of it with DK Metcalf healthy is you come out with a game plan where both of those guys can be stars. They talked up JSN in the offseason a lot about how he was going to be uncoverable. And those of us who think that JSN is good wanted to believe, and the people who, really anchored to some of his performances last year are just like, yeah, I mean, you got to show some of that. You can't just say it. And then they come out this season, and even the 16 target game, you're kind of like, I mean, those are a lot of targets, but where are the plays that we saw this last week? I mean, how do you get into week 9 and that's the first time you're seeing those kinds of plays? Then in his last 2 games before going out with that knee injury, DK Metcalf led the NFL in air yards. So can you incorporate them both? I have some confidence in your Washington coordinator. I think that path is there. But even again in this game, and you see some of the mistakes that Geno made, Geno is kind of a unique quarterback to me, because certainly you have lots of different quarterback profiles, but most of the truly elite ones, or the well above average ones, you're good enough at the things that make an NFL quarterback good that it sort of transcends the weaknesses, or at least it raises your entire game. The quarterbacks who don't process well enough or don't have accuracy, even if you are a playmaker like an Anthony Richardson or even arguably a Will Levis, there's just no way to overcome all of those weaknesses. With Geno, you see someone who has top 10, if not top 5 arm strength. Not arm strength, arm talent. Some of the throws that he's made to DK Metcalf this season have been absolutely insane. And some of the throws that he made to JSN in this game are not possible for most NFL QBs, and that was one of the reasons it was so exciting. And yet the mistakes are so blatant and so bad. And the ability to incorporate multiple receivers is so limited that once you have DK Metcalf back as this, Calvin Johnson type of player, can you get both guys involved when Geno simply doesn't seem to have that in his repertoire? I mean, partly it doesn't have to be a thing where DK Metcalf is the first read on every play and JSN is working off of that every play. It doesn't have to be the thing where the first reads to JSN are all underneath if DK Metcalf is also on the field, right? So there are ways to make that work even within Geno's skill set. We haven't seen it yet. I would really like to see it when they come out of their bye.
Yeah, I think we are moving that way, because remember early in the year they were pretty run heavy. I think Grubb was getting his footing. I remember in the Lions game, after we talked, I think it was on the Sunday night show, I remember talking about a play where on a key like third down, JSN, they basically went like trips left. JSN's on the inside and he runs like a deep like slant and just beats his man off the line, and it's just like gone, it seems like, to the opposite side of the field. There's no one over there running a route on that side, and he's just clear, and he has so much field to throw to for a first down. But Geno was locked in on Metcalf, and I just remember the point at that time for me was he's very focused on Metcalf as the first read on a lot of these, but when he is focused on JSN's getting open, and I think they'll see like that type of a play on film and go back and go, okay, well, we need to make sure that we're considering JSN on this route here, right? In these situations, I think his usage has been super favorable, even a higher than Metcalf most of the times in routes, and Lockett meaningfully behind as the number 3. And then when Metcalf's out, he's playing like a ton. Like they see him as a top 2 receiver, and then Lockett and the other guys a little bit behind. And then when Metcalf was out, I think this game was the evidence that they're like, we're also now going to first read you and make you the object of our vertical passing game. And it worked so well, in addition to the plays that got called back and everything, that to me, it's one of those clear toothpaste in the tube moments. The Geno Smith stuff you were talking about, it's only his 3rd year starting since 2014. He's a 34-year-old quarterback, but in some ways, I think it's an experience issue, right? Like he's making some of these really bad decisions. He didn't play for like 6 years. And then when he gets those first opportunities, he doesn't throw a lot of picks in those first couple of years. In 2022, 2023, protected the ball really well, actually. It was one of the things people really liked about him. Accuracy was strong and also protected the ball. It seems like in this new offense now, he's being asked to take some more shots. He both leads the league in passing yards, in passing completions, attempts, and yards, but also in interceptions with 10 right now. And I think that there is a little bit of like, I haven't actually played in this type of offense where I have to learn um, the consequences of my bad decisions, right? And like, again, because he was naturally doing a good job of protecting the ball over the last 2 years. You get into it, you only, I know it's his third year starting, but you only start 17 games in 2022, 15. I mean, he's at like 40 starts since, again, 2014. I mean, 45 starts. It's a meaningful amount, but it's not a ton. It's like a third season of a rookie coming in. Again, yeah, he started some games early in his career as well. He has 75 starts in his career, but you wait 6-7 years to actually get out there and play. I do think
I
there's a
agree.
little bit of it that's like, you lost this game because you threw that pick, and now you got to go back and be like, that's the consequence of that decision, and learn from that.
Well, it was the later pick that was almost more impossible to understand, and the one where his teammates were even coming up to it because he just stood there on the field, like with his eyes glassy, staring at what had happened after he misses AJ Barner. And it's like, that was the play, but he wasn't ever there. And he throws it by him, and just unluckily for him, there's a defender there. Yeah, experience does seem to be a bit of an issue. I know a lot of people are going to be like, you're not giving that same benefit to some of these other guys who are young and basically haven't played at all. It's tough for these NFL teams, right? Because, I mean, I don't know how Anthony Richardson is supposed to get better without playing, but also how do you play him? I mean, someone like a Trey Lance, I mean, it would be great to see the Cowboys go that direction in a lost season. You've got somebody who probably is as valuable, if not more so, than Richardson. It's tough. I mean, again, how do you get to the level you need to be without getting some of these opportunities? Maybe some of these teams are sitting on a Jordan Love. You got to give the Packers a ton of credit for how much patience they showed, because it wasn't just that Love looked bad through all those years where he was sitting behind Rodgers. He struggled in the first half of the season where he finally got to play. And then the second half of last year, he looked like the best quarterback in the NFL. And things can go the other direction. You mentioned CJ Stroud. That's the most surprising thing of anything that's happened in the NFL this year, Ben, to me, is that last year CJ Stroud looked like a generational player, like a true generational player. Like he was going to be the next, that he could be in that Patrick Mahomes range and maybe even in some ways be better, because that ability to throw over the top was just extraordinary, to extend the play, to throw over the top. I don't know what the Houston Texans are doing. There was no point in that game. I mean, you look at the records coming into that game, it would have shocked me if the Texans won that game. It's easy to say after the fact, but it would have been shocking if they had won. They're just simply not nearly as good as the Jets, which again goes to the fact that the Jets have a lot to answer for to getting themselves in this position. But I mean, the game was not even competitive at any point.
The game against the Colts in the first half, this is the week prior with Stroud. In the first half, he missed a lot of throws. And I had some stuff in my notes that was like, this is not good. He's not played well. He's missing a bunch of throws. Some of it is on the line because he's under pressure a lot. He seems to be speeding it up, but it's not working well. The second half played a lot better. And I don't think I went that hard on it in signals as a result of him actually making some big throws and them going on to win, which wasn't necessarily because of him, but it's more because Anthony Richardson didn't necessarily play great on the other side. He had a really tough game the week prior to that against the Packers. And so then you're stringing two games together, but okay, he played well after halftime. They did a better job protecting him. He threw some better passes. This Jets game, now really 3 games in a row. Now it's a short week. It's against the Jets. They did a good job with Hassan Reddick, who's now on the Jets defense has gotten better because they actually were able to pressure a little bit in this game, which has been a big issue for them. But they were keeping in Mixon to block. Stroud ended up with a ton of air yards, a very high ADOT, was pushing the ball vertically. It was clear that they were trying to do that. My issue is he's got open players and he's just missing them. Like that late in the game, John Mechie has 2 targets for no catches in this game, but it could have been a huge game for him. He has a key third down where he comes open and Stroud just misses him. Later, you get an extended play on another third down. It's 3rd and 7 from the 9-yard line. And it's a little bit of an extended play, but Mechie comes open on like sort of a delayed slant. He's just running towards the middle of the field and there's no other defender there. Stroud just misses high and they got to kick a field goal that they miss Kaimi Fairbairn hits the upright, you can't, like, that was, like you said, they didn't play particularly well. That was one of their big chances to actually score some points in this game. It was a gimme touchdown on a third down. You have to get that throw on him. Again, a little bit of extended play. Maybe he's a little off balance, but it wasn't too tough of a pocket in terms of you have to get the throw on him. And again, to throw high at the red zone, in the red zone, was a big issue. We saw this a number of times this week. Mason Rudolph threw a pick at the red zone off of Chigakonkwo's hands, a little bit of a high throw. These high throws at the red zones are at the red zone, the goal line, are an issue, because if the players don't get their hands up above the ball and they're not able to bring it in, it just deflects up in tight space and often goes for an interception. Okonkwo is one that comes to mind, but I know this happened at least twice, maybe 3 times near the goal line. I bring that up in part because that's something I thought Jaden Daniels low-key did incredibly well. Terry McLaurin scores a 1-yard slant in this game. It's been hard for some of these teams to run the ball in every single time because they're running so much close. To be able to have McLaurin just win on a quick slant, who's been a vertical receiver, at the 1, and then Daniels smartly throws it low, and McLaurin goes down and catches it. Even if that goes incomplete, that's fine.
It was great to see both sides of that, right? The ball placement, and then a receiver who is like, my whole responsibility here is to get down to the ball and catch it, not be like, oh, the ball's a little bit low.
Right.
And it was beautiful.
Yep. When you said that, and I said, right, I'm thinking of Elijah Moore on a play on like a third down. It's a comebacker, and James Winston throws it a little low. And he's just like, I'm not going to go after that. I'm just going to kick it with my foot. It's like, go down and get the ball. Like, try to make a play. What are you doing? But some of these receivers are just like, that's too low. I mean, go down and get it. And yeah, I agree. That's why I brought it up. And yeah, both sides of that. I love the way you emphasized that McLaurin's play was very good as well. But the throw from Stroud there was disappointing. Anyway, I didn't really have much else there. I was just
and it's just a reminder of how difficult football is and how difficult anything is. But professional sports obviously played at a very high level. It is a reminder as well of just how extraordinary, like, the previous generation of superstars was. That year in and year out, game in and game out, they could be so good for so long, given how difficult it is to play the position. I mean, Stroud's going to be very good. If you have him this year, for his receivers, for the Texans, it's nice to see that they could finally get Tank Dell going a little bit. Certainly if they're able to get Nico Collins back. This isn't the end of the world for them. My biggest concern with Houston is simply that I don't think that they have the mindset of being a dominant team. It seems like they have the mindset of it's okay to squeak games out against bad teams, and eventually we'll get where you want to go. One of the things we talked about them before the season was whether or not this was going to be a statement year. It doesn't appear that they have an interest in making that statement. Hopefully at some time as they go along, they'll be more willing to make it.
I do think this week's interesting because I got asked in Signals Gold about benching him, and they play the Lions at home, and the Lions have traded for Zadarius Smith now, but are without Aiden Hutchinson. Maybe that transition will allow them, Houston, to be able to protect a little bit better. The Lions, we know, will get in a shootout with you. It's got a high over-under. The Lions are favored by like 3.5 points on the road, which I think is fair. The Lions are a really good football team right now, and the Texans aren't. So they're getting like 6.5 on a neutral field, basically, or 6. It's 2.5 to 3. Should be going the Texans' way. Instead, it's over the field goal. It's 3.5 the Lions' way on the road. That makes sense, though, for the reasons we're saying. But this could be a game where Stroud actually does something. I'm hoping.
How concerned are you about? So, Colin and I talked about this a bit. We definitely try and do these shows to be certainly as different as possible. But this element of Detroit, I mean, even before this game that they play in a rainstorm, they are down at the bottom. You pull up the NFL pace tool on our site, you see not a lot of plays per 60 minutes, which then translates into not a lot of passing plays, in part because they are also, very balanced. A lot of those things relate to the fact they've blown teams out. And so you're not going to call the game the same way if you have a lot of special teams touchdowns, or if you're up by 4 or 5 touchdowns midway through the third quarter. But this most recent game, a game where you don't even get a lot from Jahmyr Gibbs, in part because he does take kind of a wicked hit, which didn't seem like it was a problem, but you watch that game and you're like, it seems like the Lions are saying there's no reason for us to risk Jahmyr Gibbs in this game when we have other players.
That's exactly how I read it. I got asked about if we should be worried about David Montgomery getting more work in that game on Signals Gold. And I brought up that hit. It looked a little weird. And the Lions, to me, have made it clear that Gibbs is their guy. And then Montgomery does a lot of good stuff and as a role player in addition to that. But it's not even a 50-50. And I think they were protecting Gibbs. They got ahead. They get the pick 6. The Packers, bad weather. Packers are going to have a hard time coming back from that anyway. We're going to let David Montgomery in the weather deal with this. I think it was the opposite of concerning for Gibbs. I think it was like a positive. Like he already had a good game, 70 yards and a TD, but we're going to protect him, like you said, in bad weather. It's exactly how I read it.
So weather matters, but you had a game here where the Packers came out and they're like, we're just going to run Josh Jacobs every time. We're going to try and keep this game as close as possible. You had a game where the Giants came out, and in both of these, in the Giants situation, you have a game where, unlike what we talked about a previous week, where some of these teams actually leaned into the strength of the opposing defense. The Giants are like, the Commanders are a lot easier to run against, but what would happen if we just gave the ball to Tyrone Tracy every play until we're blown out? It's like, will that work? Also, will it make Malik Neighbors happy?
But at least, I mean, to get back to focal points, they came out in the second half and he gets 4 catches on the first drive of the second half. They had 0 passing yards at half. Daniel Jones was in the negative for a bit. Passes beyond the line of scrimmage and such. He's at 0, 4 for 6 for 0 at half. Like you said, they're just running the ball every single play. But they came out after halftime and they're like, we got to get Neighbors something. And so they threw to him 4 times on the first possession of the second half. He caught 3 of them or something like that. But I mean, that was at least somewhat okay to see in a weird game.
Yeah, you don't want to see the Giants become any version of well, I mean, this analogy doesn't really work. If Malik Neighbors could be Justin Jefferson, that would be fine. You don't want the Giants to be treating him like Jordan Addison, where the Vikings games, people will see Jordan Addison's lines, his box scores, and be like, he's not very involved in the game. It's like, it's not just that. Every target that Jordan Addison has every week comes in like a 4-play span where they realize that they haven't used him and he's wide open and they're going to get the ball to him. And then he does something like this past week, dominate, score a touchdown. And they're like, okay, we've checked that box off. A week from now, there will be one drive when Jordan Addison is involved again. You're like, it's,
else?
Justin Jefferson is playing like the greatest wide receiver of all time because Sam Darnold is a train wreck. And yet everything still basically looks fine because Justin Jefferson is superhuman. But it just like, why not use some of the other guys because they're also good? I don't get it.
That you're describing the Eagles too, Sean. You're describing how good AJ Brown is and what's going on with Devonta Smith. AJ Brown goes out in this game, and I have in my notes like they can't throw the ball without AJ Brown. And then one drive, Devonta Smith has a big conversion, then catches a long pass, like a deep pass right after the big third down conversion. And then one hands a ball in the end zone, 3 catches for like 60 yards and a TD, finished the game with 4 catches. And AJ Brown missed half the game. Like, why were they not getting Devonta Smith the ball more? They just forgot about him too. They're just like, we're going to run it with Saquon every single time otherwise. And we're just not even going to throw to our really good young receiver. I've had the same thought you did with Addison about Devonta. And I'm not, we always do the Devonta AJ Brown thing. I'm not giving you crap about it. I think they made a mistake. They needed to get Devonta going more. What were they doing? They almost lost that game.
I mean, I have no idea what the Eagles are doing. That team is super weird. I mean, they should be the NFC's version of the Ravens. They somehow
Devonta looked incredible.
Quite.
How good did Devonta look on that drive, though? I mean, he looked incredible.
He's good. I mean, I think he's a top 6 or 7 receiver in the NFL who is used as though he's. I'm trying to think of a
Jordan Addison.
Yeah, Jordan Addison. Right. It's brutal there. I mean, the whole Jordan Addison thing to me does. So this entire offseason, I'm like, people criticized Calvin Ridley's rookie season because they scored touchdowns. And like, if you scored touchdowns playing alongside Julio Jones, you should be excited, not disappointed. The thing I guess that I didn't realize was going to be the case, because that's not actually the way things work, and it shouldn't be the case. I didn't realize it was going to be so exact, where just like Calvin Ridley had a down second year before erupting in year 3, that was also going to happen to Jordan Addison. I'm not thrilled with that part of the progression. I mean, you're hoping that what you're about to see with some of these guys is what we've gotten in spurts from Zay Flowers and Josh Downs, where the team is like, oh, you know what? We should use the guy who is borderline transcendent. Right. So
I mean,
maybe we'll get a little more of that.
We've talked about this before, and I've written about it, and I think it bears emphasizing this idea of focal points. The NFL, the way the defenses are playing and the way the offenses, like the counterpunch has been a little bit scheme related. We've talked about that. Haven't necessarily harped on it. It hasn't, in my opinion, necessarily been the entire story or anything like that. But there is an element here where it does get to usage, and like, for the most part, the teams are going to do all that correctly. They know who the really good players are, right? They have the players, they have them in practice and all that stuff, and they're going to draw up plays for these players and things. But you just the difference between Josh Downs and Devonta Smith feels like usage to me right at this point. Like, the one team is prioritizing letting Josh Downs have an impact on the game, and the other team is not. And it's a team level decision, and maybe that kind of thing has crept in throughout the history of fantasy, but I feel like more so this year, and in the modern era of the NFL, the stats about how high the number one wide receivers target shares are getting against single high when they roll into single high. Like, the quarterback's like, I'm going to throw to the wide receiver one every time. Like, Jamar Chase is like 40% or something target share against single high or something like that. And then when you get the cover 2 and a little bit more spread, like the targets get spread. But there are these situations where defenses are in certain looks. It's like, we can get the ball to where we want to get it to, or we can let that guy go win that one-on-one coverage. And it seems like certain teams, like Jalen Hurts, is willing to do that with A.J. Brown, but not with Devonta Smith, for example. The Vikings are willing to do that with Justin Jefferson, but not necessarily with Addison. And till they then decide for one drive to design some plays, and then he makes some plays on that one drive.
Ben, it's never a good feeling when you have to go back and say, wait, Tom Brady was probably right. But Tom Brady was probably right. Yeah. So much of what we're seeing does seem to be the quarterback's inability to do anything other than the most superficial. Superficial isn't the right term. It's, again, how the play is designed to get the ball to the first receiver. And it's probably not fair to put that on, certainly not entirely on the quarterbacks. No, we do see some quarterbacks who look very good at getting the ball to their first guy. You know, someone like a Geno Smith, someone like a Sam Darnold, someone like a Jalen Hurts. These aren't bad quarterbacks, but you know, you can say perhaps Dak Prescott. I think that one in some ways is the most surprising to me, because in the past he has seemed to be a guy who, yeah, I mean, you're going to get the ball to CeeDee Lamb. If you're not, that's a huge mistake. You don't want to be spreading it around a ton when you have a superstar. That can be equally problematic, but it's been shocking this year that they have no other answers. But you have a lot of these situations where the quarterback...
They gave up a 4th round pick for Jonathan Mingo. I'm surprised you didn't see that. They solved that problem.
It always cracks me up where you have... And again, contracts matter, but some of these contracts have been paid down by the teams that are trading the guys. And you have someone, it's like in your dynasty,
the Panthers just traded,
gives like 3 first-round picks for a guy who just busted already and has no use. And then someone trades a future like 10th round pick in a dynasty format that only goes like 3 rounds for like Devontae Adams. And you're like, yeah, he's old and not as good anymore, but when you have these teams where sometimes you're looking, it's like it's a 5th round pick for a 6th round pick, but also like if the guy plays well, it flips. So what are you doing here?
Devonta Smith or Deontay Johnson, they paid down his salary. The Panthers just traded him a week ago. They paid down his salary and traded him for a 4th and 5th swap The Cowboys just gave up a fourth straight up for a way worse player on that same team for like the same salary. Because Jerry Jones said they really liked him in the draft. And he went in the second round. They probably were bummed that they couldn't take him in the second round. So, I mean, look, they got him for a fourth, Sean. Do they not pay attention to what he's done for a year and a half since then?
Ben, I want to ask you, is there any chance that the Kansas City Chiefs liked Breece Hall or Travis Etienne in the draft? Because both of those guys seem like they should be available, right? I mean, Breece Hall like cannot pick up anything short yardage. Travis Etienne, I mean, who even knows what's happening there?
They started him. They were using him early, and then they also used Bigsby more. He played quite a bit more, and then they used Dearness Johnson a ton and threw a pick late on a first down when they were potentially about to steal a win on a fade to Dearness Johnson.
I don't know. It'd be fun if the teams that like need good players and that Ray Davis touchdown was impressive. It's like the 15th running back on the Buffalo Bills. It's better than the Kansas City Chiefs starter. The Baltimore Ravens are about to like work Keaton Mitchell into the mix. So right now, the Baltimore Ravens have Zay Flowers, who is playing like maybe the second best receiver in the NFL after Justin Jefferson, right? Unstoppable before the catch, unstoppable after the catch. We talked about how much that mattered when stuff on Diggs went to the Bills. He's obviously no longer that guy, but it does matter when those guys are at their peak. They have Derrick Henry, who, when you have to account for Lamar Jackson, is basically a 230-pound man who's also one of the 3 or 4 fastest backs in the NFL. Good luck dealing with that. They have Justice Hill, who is like massively gapped the rest of the running back position in points above average per route. So you think about, I mean, again, it's not like he's heavily used, but they have a backup running back who is currently playing as the best receiving back in football, and it's not close. They obviously have Lamar Jackson.
And he makes like contested catches, like over the shoulder, like Willie Mays catches. He's a stud.
They have Mark Andrews, who is probably still fine, and like they just don't have any use for because like there are only so many people you can play. They've picked up Deontay Johnson, and they're going to add Keaton Mitchell, who is going to become the fastest man on their team. Now, I don't know if it's the first game because obviously coming back from injury, but Keaton Mitchell, like if there's a hole there, he is going to be gone.
Yeah. He was a revelation last year. I was adding him to like Texan stacks in the last round of best ball because I was like, at this point, I'm basically just talking about a handcuff running back and a bring back for, if this best ball team makes it to the title game, the Texans play the Ravens in week 17. So that was the thought process, because my mind was like, this guy, if something were to happen to Derrick Henry, he's the handcuff long term. He's the guy who comes back. He was so good last year. They really like him. They brought him along slowly. But Justice Hill, to your point, has been so good now that it's almost like, I guess there's room for Keaton Mitchell on some of these, managed teams. We can try to stash him, but it's not even like easy to justify adding him because they have so many good players. That's what I believe John Harbaugh used the word depth when he was talking about Deontay Johnson. That, in addition, it was something like, in addition to, bringing him in because we want him to be able to make some plays for us and this and that, it also adds some much needed roster depth. It's like, oh, okay, well, they got Nelson Aguilar and Rashad Bateman to make big plays in this game.
We had to pick up Deontay Johnson because I don't know if you've seen, but there was a fantasy writer out there who liked Devontae Walker. He is not good.
I think he was more like, we don't want anyone else to get him for this price. We're not going to let the Texans replace Stephon Diggs. We're not going to let the Chiefs bring in another, redundant option to DeAndre Hopkins. We'll just go ahead and grab him instead of our other. The Bills could probably use him too. All the other AFC contenders that we're worried about. Heck, the Bengals can't keep T. Higgins healthy. The Steelers are on the market, even though they don't probably want Deontay Johnson back. Ravens are like, we'll just make him our 10th receiver and then, hold him. I don't even think he's
like we want Deontay Johnson about as much as we want Emmanuel Sanders. There have been some plays late in games so far this year where Derrick Henry was playing deep in garbage time in order to get him to some stat thresholds. I mean, he's having such a good year that there might continue to be history throughout that they're looking at. But at the same time, some of those things are going to be pretty specific in terms of the stat they're trying to get for the player. As good as they're going to be, I don't think they're going to want to use him deep in garbage time too often. You look at the way that they're blowing some of these teams out, and you look at, a team like the Lions and how they're blowing some of these teams out. If you have a guy with speed, like one of the things with the Lions, their backup running backs are good, but they're probably not, you put in Craig Reynolds, you put in Sione Vaki, you put in some of these guys, they're probably not going to take a handoff and go 80 yards because there was a little bit of a gap, with like 3 minutes left in the game when everybody knows you're going to run. With Keaton Mitchell, that could be, a 14-point touch in fantasy just right there.
Yeah, he could be super exciting.
I mean, I don't know if this is just all in my mind, Ben. You might have a much better sense of this. It's felt to me for several years that garbage time has ceased to be a thing in the way that it always felt like it was. That's certainly not exclusively the case, but you can imagine how one of the best moments of this past week was when Desmond Ridder decided that he could throw an NFL pass and found Brock Bowers in the end zone on basically the final play of the game. You're like, that completely changed Sunday, and it was irrelevant to anything that was happening in reality. We could see some of that from these Ravens players just because they're so good. Regardless of how many people they take out, there are going to be other guys going in.
You're thinking Keaton Mitchell's going to score a bunch of second half points when they're up by 35, which might be the case.
Seems possible. I mean,
the one guy that wants a word with your statement about there not being as much garbage time, which I do think is true. I think teams are more willing to throw in the towel. There was always a thing that was like, you played to the final whistle, and macho man, it's the NFL. There's only 16, 17 weeks, especially since they've added the 17th week. But even prior with the health stuff and when the concussions became big, teams were much more willing to throw in the white flag. You see that a lot more. You see them pull the quarterbacks a lot earlier. You see teams do the equivalent of bringing in a position player to pitch, like in baseball, where they just start running the ball when they're behind with like 10 minutes left. They're like, we're just gonna see how quickly we can end this game and we'll punt it. You do see that. The one guy who is gonna say no to that and disagrees with you is Jameis Winston, who in the second half, after they fell way behind the Chargers, threw interceptions on each of the first 3 drives, and then just chucks it, right? It's just going to chuck it the whole game. Cedric Tillman was another one of those players who had a drop on a slant in the red zone. The other one was Keon Coleman. I was trying to think back through those. Coleman had one that actually got deflected up for a pick this week as well. Tillman had a drop on one. The next play, Winston has Judy open, doesn't quite get it teardropped over into the back corner of the end zone, and a defender tips it for an interception. So both Tillman and Keon kind of cost their team a turnover with a bad drop, an open drop on a slant. Tillman would have had some contact. Maybe wouldn't even have necessarily been able to get into the end zone, but he played well again in this game. But yeah, the Browns, I think, are going to be a team that they're going to throw.
Browns should be fun. If you don't have Cedric Tillman, you're pretty scared. If you do have Jerry Jeudy, you're thinking like maybe there's a chance. He looked, like just a starting caliber NFL wide receiver. Not anything fantastic, but that's a step up for him. And especially the contrast with Elijah Moore, who had drawn a ton of targets the previous week. He did not look like anything in that, trying to back it up, play 2 weeks in a row. Ben, you're talking about garbage time and what the Browns did. Can I contrast that for you with the Cardinals Bears game, where once the Cardinals went up 24-9, I was working through this because I was trying to explain to readers like what the actual situation was in the zero RB universe with James Conner and then Benson and DeMarcado. And to get the exact context down, because obviously I watched this game and had a feel for it, but at the same time wanting to be specific, 24-9, and then there were 9 consecutive possessions in which neither team gained 40 yards.
It was really bad. It was not fun at all. The Cardinals get the DeMarcado run. I mean, God. There was 11 seconds in the half. They're at their own 47-yard line, and they call a draw on a I think it was 3rd and 21. And it seemed like almost certainly they were just hoping to get, I'm pulling it up because I want to find the exact information. There it is. 3rd and 5. It was not a 3rd and 21. I'm thinking of a different play. Oh, the 3rd and long was the Saquon Barkley draw where he had, I think it was like 3rd and 17, whatever, and ran like a 19-yard TD run right before half as well on a draw play where like these defenses are, they have gone
your version better. If anybody comes back, you just be like, what you thought you saw in reality was just something from a Russian troll farm.
15 seconds in the half. He scores with 4 seconds is when he crosses the plane. It's just a draw play on a 3rd and 5 from the 47. They're trying to get into long field goal range, and he just busts it around to the side. These defenses have gone so far toward, lighter personnel and defending the pass. They don't have a player on the field who actually wants to tackle running backs. Like we've talked about with like Saquon, he's having all these big plays, and you've talked about like, well, he's not actually forcing a lot of missed tackles. It's a lot of yards before contact. We talk about Derrick Henry when he gets going.
It was hilarious again because Barkley's score absolutely massive. I am disappointed in myself for not being at least slightly more enthusiastic about it. Because one of the things I always tell people is that you don't have to break tackles if you run to daylight. His peripherals are so mediocre. He's like, why are you trying to break tackles? Run where the players aren't. Or if you're playing the Chicago Bears, just run straight down the field to the end zone on a 3rd down play with 2 seconds left.
They literally won't even try to stop you. And the reason both of these plays are so mind-boggling is like, again, we talk about the sport being a game of possessions and those things. You score right before half and your opponent doesn't even have an opportunity to, potentially do anything on the way back. It's massive. That's the one time during the game, other than the very end of the game, obviously, where you just haven't, the game takes a break, right? And then we have a new kickoff and we start over in the second half. We have this hard stop. Teams should be doing so much more to try to score last, right? In halves. And most coaches have figured this out. The coaches on defense will often use their timeouts if there's a minute left and the other team's down inside the 10. They don't just let them run it all the way down and score at the end of the half. They use their timeouts because they want to have an opportunity to get a field goal on offense on the other side. You can't allow a dude to have a 53-yard draw play rushing touchdown with 4 seconds in the half. It just can't happen. How is there nobody on the field who wants to tackle running backs? It's insane.
I didn't even get a sense of like how they would have stopped him. There was never any personnel along his path.
14-9. When that happened, it makes it 21-9. And then to your point, nothing happens, right? The Cardinals come out in the second half. They do get a field goal drive on their first drive. 24-9. Now the Bears are playing. They had a quick 3 and out, but the Bears take over their second drive of the half. They're playing from heavy, negative script, and they just looked awful on offense the rest of the way. You mentioned that's the stretch. The whole rest of the game, nobody gains any yards. The Cardinals are just like, well, they get another field goal on a turnover on downs. They get a safety. They add 5 points, but the Cardinals did nothing in the second half. Speaking of things we got to talk about with the Cardinals.
I'm assuming this was big because obviously I don't know, but it kind of cracked me up. Column sent it to me after we recorded the video of DJ Moore just walking off the field during the play.
Yeah, that
became. You don't see that too often.
No, I mean, but he went out of bounds. He was ineligible. He should just come off the field, right? It seemed like he thought the play was done. If he tries to come back on the field and then Caleb throws it to him, it's an illegal touching call.
It's a bad look to limp off the field and
it's a bad look.
Have the limp go away.
Yeah, he played the next snap. It's not a good look. The optics are bad. There's another one of these optics are bad situations for sure.
Shawn, I love DJ Moore. It's nothing against him.
Yeah, the Trey McBride play. So he gets a rushing TD. We finally get a Trey McBride touchdown early in the game. He catches a pass down to the 2-yard line, and you're like, well, this is an example of why Trey McBride can't score. 15-yard catch. That's not really the way that I thought about it. I actually thought about it as like, that's the one where he has to score, because the only way we're going to get a Trey McBride touchdown is if it is a 17-yard TD and, Kyler loops it over the top and he's actually getting downfield a little bit. He gets down to the 2, then they give him a handoff and he scores on the very next play. And you're like, oh my God, we got a Trey McBride touchdown. This is so cool. A little while later, they get down to the 1 and they call that play that we've all seen 1 million times where you get a heavy formation, get 3 tight ends in there, you do a play action, and you leak one tight end out toward the corner of the end zone. They go, vertical to the back of the end zone, and they're kind of just moving across the back of the end zone. He is completely forgotten about. Kyler is at the back of his drop. He has one read. There is one route. It's the tight end leak route. You've been saying to me that Kyler can't see over the line of scrimmage. He hits the back of his drop, and there is a free rusher, but the free rusher, I took a screenshot of a video that Ian Harditz from Fantasy Life shared and noted, like, that just was like, this is so bad. No excuse for how the ball wasn't out on time. The play worked. I'm looking at it right now. He's at the top of his drop where his back foot hits, and he's looking, and he's got the ball in that throwing motion where a quarterback on time should be able to then throw. The free rusher is 6 yards away from him. He's unblocked, but he has plenty of time to throw this football and not even get hit. If he gets hit, it's going to be a clear roughing the passer. He instead starts to scramble, does a ridiculous pirouette. Even then, Trey McBride's in the back of the end zone doing jumping jacks. I'm open. The play worked. He tries to sling it out there. All he has to do is get it into play. There is one defender that maybe Kyler, when he hit the top of his drop, thought was going to get back to McBride. Maybe he can't tell that McBride's 5 yards behind this player at least. That defender sucked in on the other tight end who ends up blocking and releasing. So he's actually moving away from McBride when you watch the rest of the play. I shared 2 screenshots in Stealing Signals. The second one is this defender isn't even aware that McBride's behind him. He thinks that Kyler's looking at the tight end in the front of the end zone, the second tight end who blocked and released. Kyler, after this ridiculous pirouette, created his own pressure, throws off his back foot. Still, all he needed to do was just get the ball in bounds, and Trey McBride could fair catch a touchdown. He threw it like 7 yards out of bounds.
The best part of the play, or the worst part of the play, depending on your perspective, but certainly the part that is the most entertaining, it was almost like different frames in a comic strip or something like that, where you see all of the emotions. Because first Trey McBride is like, oh, the play worked. They didn't even come with me. And then he's like, oh, he's not quite seeing me. And he starts to like edge a little bit further away because like no one is ever coming with him. And then he starts, jumping around the jumping jacks you're saying. He sees Kyler start to turn back in his direction. It's like, oh, well, there's still a chance. And then he sees Kyler Murray cock his arm, and you can see the elation. And he's like, they've never covered me. I'm still wide open. He's throwing it to me. And then you see his eyes start to track the ball, and you can see the moment that it comes over him that Kyler has still not seen him, that he's simply throwing the ball away. Throwing the ball away in his direction, but just throwing the ball away. He's essentially thrown it in the stands. He's like, yeah, I'm uncovered in the end zone. And he's just like, never score again on a non-rushing play. Because
I love
I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen anything like it.
It was a shocking play. I love the note of the body language because I missed that on the screenshot that I have that I shared on Twitter and everything. When Kyler hits the back of his drop, the other thing is McBride's doing the arm up thing that receivers like to do. The Randy Moss, he burns a guy. Receivers like to do on deep balls. I'm open. Put the ball up. He's holding his arm above his head. If Kyler is confused about anything, the arm is like, hey, I'm open already. From the top of his drop, from the moment Kyler turns his head around, McBride's got his arm up. I'm uncovered. And then to your point, all of the other responses, the arms up. The only other thing I loved about it, you described it so well, but when he throws it away, he has room horizontally towards the sideline. It's just that McBride's at the back of the end zone. He can't throw it over his head. He's got so much space to throw this ball to. McBride can come forward to the front of the end zone if he needs to, as long as Murray puts a little bit of air under it. He threw it, like you said, away, but also like toward the sideline. So McBride, when you see that at a moment of elation, he goes sprinting along the back of the end zone, right, to try to track the ball. He stays in bounds the whole way, and then eventually he's like, oh, this ball's way out of bounds. But he's like, I can run this down for a moment. And then he drifts out of bounds, pulls off, both handles of the chin strap, right? You see him do he's demonstrably frustrated. This guy's super, super competitive. One of my favorite moments earlier this year, because this guy hasn't been scoring a lot of touchdowns, was on the long Kyler Murray rushing TD that was a huge play in one of the games maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. McBride's the first guy sprinting down to the end zone and slides on his knees, and you can see him. He's just full body, pumping his fists. All of his muscles are veins are popping out. He's so pumped that his team scored a touchdown. He doesn't care that Kyler Murray scrambled, because I think on the play, I'm always watching McBride. On the play, McBride was open, but Kyler ends up scrambling for a TD, and he runs right over to Kyler. He's the first guy to celebrate with him. He's so fired up, they're going to win a football game. That's all he cares about. I mean, this guy's anyway, I freaking love Trey McBride. After that incompletion, he's just frustrated, not because he didn't get a touchdown, probably because he's wants to score a touchdown at some point in his life, but also it's just the play worked. Throw the ball. What are you doing? We need the touchdown. I don't care if it's me, but throw the ball to me. He was his reaction. I don't think he's trying to show up Murray at all. His reaction is just visceral frustration. Can't help but laugh.
I got some notes in the Monday piece about how this also relates to Marvin Harrison, which I thought was kind of amusing. You may or may not as the reader, but that is out there for you. Ben, this has been great. It's been cathartic. We will have some more content for the listeners. We appreciate everybody on a day that certainly, regardless of what you were hoping for, is emotionally fraught. Get out there, hug your friends and family, do something for a stranger, pass some love around. We certainly love you guys. This has been Stealing Bananas. I'm Shawn Siegele. With me, as always, is Ben Gretch. You can follow at Yards Per Gretch, at Stealing Signals, at Stealing Lines. Get in there, subscribe to his YouTube. That is Stealing Signals as well. Click on notifications so you know when he goes live. So many cool articles from Ben throughout the week. You don't want to miss any of those. We'd love to have you over at RotoViz. That discount that I've been mentioning is on the 3-month sub. We'll take you through the end of the year and even get some of our cool rookie work, which, I'm biased, but I think has been pretty profitable for readers the last couple of years. Check that out. Again, leave us a rating, review, all those things. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.